The respiratory system. The respiratory system is a network of organs and tissue that help you breathe. It includes your airways, lungs, and blood vessels. These parts work together to move oxygen through your body and clean up waste gases like carbon dioxide. The respiratory system consists of all the organs and other parts of your body involved in breathing. This includes the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and lungs. To explain in better terms, the respiratory system can be divided into microscopic and microscopic parts. Macroscopic anatomy involves the examination of relatively large structures and features, usually visible with the unaided eye. On the respiratory system, the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchi are considered parts of the macroscopic anatomy. Microscopic anatomy is a branch of anatomy that relies on the use of microscopes to examine the smallest structure of the body, these being tissues, cells, and molecules. On the respiratory system, the microscopic parts are the pneumocytes type 1, pneumocytes type 2, the epithelium of the respiratory tract, cilia and blood vessels, and at last the alveoli complex. The nose and its adjacent structures. The major entrance and exit for the respiratory system is through the nose. When discussing the nose, it is helpful to divide it into two major sections, the external nose and the nasal cavity or internal nose. The external nose consists of the surface and the skeletal structure that results in the outward appearance of the nose and contributes to its numerous functions. Underneath the thin skin of the nose are its skeletal features. While the root and bridge of the nose consists of bone, the protruding portion of the nose is composed of cartilage. The nares open into the nasal cavity, which is separated into left and right sections by the nasal septum. The floor of the nasal cavity is composed of the palate. The hard palate at the anterior region of the nasal cavity is composed of bone. The soft palate at the posterior portion of the nasal cavity consists of muscle tissue. Air exits the nasal cavities via the internal nares and moves into the pharynx. The pharynx. The pharynx is a tube formed by a skeletal muscle and lined by mucous membrane that is continuous with that of the nasal cavity. The pharynx is divided into three major regions: the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. The nasopharynx is flanked by the concha of the nasal cavity, and it serves only as an airway. The oropharynx is a passageway for both air and food. The oropharynx is bordered superiorly by the nasopharynx and anteriorly by the oral cavity. The oropharynx contains two distinct sets of tonsils, the palatine and lingual tonsils. And at last, the laryngopharynx is inferior to the oropharynx and posterior to the larynx. It continues the route for ingested materials and the air until its inferior end, where the digestive and respiratory system diverge. The laryngopharynx is made of a stratified squamous epithelium. Anteriorly, the laryngopharynx opens into the larynx, whereas posteriorly it enters the esophagus. The larynx. The larynx is a cartilaginous structure inferior to the laryngopharynx that connects the pharynx to the trachea and helps regulate the volume of air that enters and leaves the lungs. The structure of the larynx is formed by several pieces of cartilage. There are three large cartilage pieces: the thyroid cartilage or anterior, the epiglottis, the superior, and cricoid cartilage from the major structure of the larynx. They attach to the epiglottis and the vocal cords and all the muscles that help move the vocal cords to produce speech. The superior portion of the larynx is lined with stratified squamous epithelium, transitioning into pseudostratified, ciliated columnar epithelium that contains goblet cells. This specialized epithelium produces mucus to trap debris and pathogens as they enter the trachea. The trachea. The trachea of the windpipes extend from the larynx towards the lungs. The trachea is formed by 16 to 20 stacked C-shaped pieces of hyaline cartilage that are connected by dense connective tissue. The trachealis muscle and elastic connecting tissue together form the fibroelastic membrane, connecting the C-shaped cartilage. The fibroelastic membrane allows the trachea to stretch and expand slightly during inhalation and exhalation, whereas the ring of cartilage provides structural support and prevent the trachea from collapsing. The trachea is lined by pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Bronchial tree. The trachea branches into the right and left primary bronchi at the carina. These bronchi are also lined by the stratified ciliated columnar epithelium containing mucus-producing goblet cells. Rings of cartilage support the structure of the bronchi and prevent their collapse. The main function of the bronchi is to provide a pathway for air to move into and out of each lung. In addition, the mucous membrane traps debris and pathogens. The alveoli. Alveoli are tiny air sacs in your lungs that take up the oxygen you breathe in and keep your body going. Alveoli are the workhouses of your respiratory system. You have about 480 million alveoli located at the end of the bronchial tubes. When you breathe in, the alveoli expand to take in oxygen. When you breathe out, the alveoli shrinks to expel carbon dioxide. Alveoli are in charge of doing the diffusion process. Although tiny, the alveoli are the center of your respiratory system gas exchange. Your blood takes the oxygen from the alveoli and gives off carbon dioxide to the alveoli. Microscopic structures. Pneumocytes type 1 and pneumocytes type 2. Type 1 pneumocytes. The cell responsible for the gas exchange that takes place on the alveoli. It is a very large thin cell stretched over a large area. This type of cell is susceptible to a larger number of toxic insults and cannot replicate itself. Type 2 pneumocytes. The cell responsible for the production and secretion of the surfactant. The type 2 pneumocytes is a smaller cell that can replicate in the alveoli and will replicate to replace damaged type 1 pneumocytes. Most of the alveolar surface is covered by simple squamous cells known as type 1 pneumocytes. These cells have a small nucleus with highly branched cytoplasmic processes. Type 1 pneumocytes cover approximately 95% of the alveolar surface. Type 2 epithelial cells have a granular appearance and, in humans, are noted to protrude into the alveoli space. Epithelium of the respiratory tract and the cilia. Most of the respiratory pathways from the nasal cavity through the bronchi are lined by ciliated, pseudostratified columnar epithelium with goblet cells. Bronchioles are lined by simple cuboidal epithelium. Lung alveoli, in contrast, are lined by very thin, simple squamous epithelium. Pseudostratified respiratory epithelium consists primarily of columnar ciliated cells. Pseudostratified respiratory epithelium consists primarily of columnar ciliated cells. Ciliary sweeps the mucus carried to the bronchi and the trachea toward the pharynx, where it can be swallowed. Scattered among the ciliated cells are occasional goblet cells. These cells secrete mucus, which moistens the epithelium surface. Blood vessels. Blood vessels are the channels through which blood is distributed by body tissues. The vessels make up two closed systems of tubes that begin and end at the heart. Based on their structure and function, blood vessels are classified as either arteries, capillaries, or veins. Based on their structure and function, blood vessels are classified as arteries, capillaries, or veins. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Pulmonary arteries transport blood that has a low oxygen content from the right ventricle to the lungs. Systemic arteries transport oxygenated blood from the left ventricle to the body tissue. The walls of an artery consist of three layers. The innermost layer, the tunica intima or internal, a simple squamous epithelium surrounded by a connective tissue basement membrane with elastic fibers. The middle layer, the tunic media, is primarily a smooth muscle and is usually the thickest layer. The outermost layer is the tunica externa or tunica adventitia. This layer is connective tissue with varying amounts of elastic and collagenous fibers. Capillaries. They are the smallest and most numerous of the blood vessels. They form the connection between the vessel that carries blood away from the heart, the arteries, and the vessel that returns the blood to the heart, the veins. The primary function of capillaries is the exchange of materials between the blood and the tissue cells. The veins. Veins carry blood towards the heart. After blood passes through the capillaries, it enters the smallest vein called venules. From the venules, it flows into progressively larger veins until it reaches the heart. In the pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary veins transport the blood from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart. The walls of veins have the same three layers as the arteries. Although all the layers are present, there is less smooth muscle and connective tissue. This makes the walls of veins thinner than those of arteries. How do we breathe? Breathing starts when you inhale air into your nose or mouth. It travels down the back of your throat and into your windpipes, which is divided into air passages called bronchial tubes. These bronchial tubes divide into smaller air passages called bronchioles. The bronchioles end in tiny balloon-like air sacs called alveoli. The alveoli are surrounded by a mesh of tiny blood vessels called capillaries. There, oxygen is brought into the bloodstream. Then, when it gets to your heart, it pumps the oxygen through your body to the cells of your tissues and organs. The cells then make carbon dioxide that goes into your blood. Your blood then carries the carbon dioxide back into your lungs when it's removed from your body when you exhale. The first part of this process is called external respiration, which is everything that occurs in the lungs. Internal respiration occurs in body cells where oxygen diffuses out of your blood and carbon dioxide diffuses out of your cells. When you breathe in, your diaphragm pulls downward. This movement expands your lungs and it vacuums a rush of air in your lungs. This causes the pressure inside your lungs to drop. This process is called negative pressure. Exhalation is the opposite. Your diaphragm relaxes upward, pushing on your lungs, allowing them to deflate. When it comes to breathing, there are two terms that we use when we want to talk about breathing: ventilation and respiration, but there's a difference between the two of them. Ventilation is the movement of a volume of gas into and out of the lung. Respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide across a membrane either in the lungs or in the cellular level. One is the action of breathing, while the other is the process by which we exchange the gases that we breathe. Respiratory problems associated with smoking. Toxins in tobacco smoke harm the body from the moment they enter through the mouth and the nose. They damage tissue and cells all the way to the lungs. When a cigarette smoke is inhaled, chemicals from the smoke are absorbed in the lungs. As a result, smoking causes lung disease. Although lungs have a way to protect itself from injury by inhaling agents, these defenses are overwhelmed when cigarette smoke is inhaled repeatedly over time. After years of exposure, lung tissue becomes scattered, loses its elasticity, and can no longer exchange air efficiently. Smoking and lung growth. Adults who smoke as teenagers can have lungs that never grow to their potential size and never perform at full capacity. This happens because the lungs of young people are still growing, but the chemicals in cigarettes and the smoke on it slow down lung growth. Such damage is permanent and increases the risk of COPD later in life. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD. People with COPD have damaged airways and slowly die from lack of oxygen. 8 out of 10 cases of COPD are caused by smoking. Women smokers in certain age groups are more than 38% times as likely to develop COPD compared with women who have never smoked. Tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a common bacterial infection that usually attacks the lungs and is spread through the air when people with the disease cough or sneeze. Smokers who have had tuberculosis are more likely than non-smokers to have a recurrence of their tuberculosis, and smokers with after tuberculosis are more likely to die from it than non-smokers who have the disease. Asthma. Asthma restricts airways and obstructs airflows, which results in wheezing and coughing. Studies suggest that young people who smoke may be more likely to develop asthma. Exposure to secondhand smoke can trigger an asthma attack in both children and adults. A severe asthma attack can put a child's life in danger. Lung cancer. Lung cancer, also known as lung carcinoma, is a malignant lung tumor characterized by uncontrolled cell growth in tissue of the lungs. The vast majority, an 85% of cases of lung cancer, are due to long-term tobacco smoking. Risks for developing lung cancer have risen steadily among smokers and dramatically among women smokers. Changes in the design and contents of cigarettes over the last 50 years have contributed to higher lung cancer risk among smokers. Children and teens who smoke can damage their lungs for life. Quitting smoking improves lung function and reduces the risk of lung infection.